Chapter 4. Restored. To say the least, President Andrew Johnson did not turn out to be the Moses who would lead the freed men and women to their promised land of freedom and happiness. Although he became an opponent of slavery during the war, he would severely disappoint any hope that he would be a committed advocate for equal rights for the former slaves. Indeed, many historians have characterized him as a white supremacist. And when it came to those traitors, people who had fought tooth and nail to keep black people in bondage, people who had plunged the nation into a horrific civil war, well, Johnson changed his tune. Politicians pressed him to keep the rebel states under military rule for months or years, but Johnson would have none of that. On Monday, May 29, 1865, with Congress not in session, Johnson issued two proclamations that made radical Republicans erupt in protest. First came Proclamation 134, granting amnesty to participants in the rebellion, with certain exceptions. It declared that most of the people who participated in the rebellion would not be charged with treason if they simply swore an oath of allegiance to the United States. Exceptions included high-ranking Confederate officials and rebels with taxable real estate valued at $20,000 and more. They had to appeal directly to the president for pardons. Though Johnson's sympathies were with poor and middling white folks, he would soon pardon a whole lot of $20,000 men. Next came Proclamation 135, reorganizing a constitutional government in North Carolina. Having tapped Democrat William Holden to be North Carolina's provisional governor, the president instructed him to hold a state constitutional convention with delegates chosen by people loyal to the United States. There were only two things North Carolina had to do to be right with the Union: rescind its ordinance of secession and ratify the 13th Amendment. This was Johnson's blueprint for reunion across the South. President Johnson bristled at the word Reconstruction. On the day he issued his first proclamations, he told John Blackjack Logan, "General, there is no such thing as Reconstruction. These states have not gone out of the Union, therefore Reconstruction is unnecessary." The president added that he did not intend to treat the former Confederate states as inchoate or embryonic beings, but merely as existing under a temporary suspension of their government, provided always they elect loyal men. The doctrine of coercion to preserve a state in the Union has been vindicated by the people. It is the province of the executive to see that the will of the people is carried out in the rehabilitation of these rebellious states, once more under the authority as well as the protection of the Union. Well, the war is over, the rebellion is put down, and we are declared free. 4/5 of our enemies are paroled, are amnestied, and the other 5 are being pardoned. And the president has, in his efforts at the reconstruction of the civil government of the states, laid in rebellion, left us entirely at the mercy of these subjugated but unconverted rebels. Addressed to the loyal citizens of the United States and to Congress, from a convention of black men held in the summer of 1865 in Alexandria, Virginia. Along with Reconstruction, Andrew Johnson also thought that General Sherman's Special Field Order No. 15 was unnecessary. He gave in to the appeals from white people who used to own the land covered in the decree and revoked Sherman's order in October 1865. Most all of those 400,000 acres on the Rice Coast would be returned to ex-Confederates. The grim task of evicting black people fell to the Freedmen's Bureau. About 40,000 people had done as General Saxton and Reverend French had urged during that meeting in a Savannah church back in February 1865. They had taken up hoes and spades and shovels. They had laid out gardens, raised chickens. They had readied ground for corn, cotton, and other crops. They had worked so hard to build new lives and communities on Edisto Island, Tybee Island, Sapelo, Ossabaw, Skidaway, on and on. And now the government was pulling the rug out from under them, their property restored. One Freedmen's Bureau document alone listed 28 black families who had their land taken away and restored to a former rebel. These people lived at Grove Point along Georgia's Little Ogeechee River. There, in the spring of 1865, Dinah Green, family of 3, for example, had been given title to 15 acres. Ned Richardson, family of 9, 30. And Titus Neal, family of 2, 10. Dinah's, Ned's, and Titus's acres and those of their neighbors were restored to Dr. John R. Cheves. During the war, his service to the Confederacy included supervising Charleston Harbor defenses and manufacturing incendiary shells. About 1,000 people were living in Tunis Campbell's five-island fiefdom. He had made St. Catherine's his base and established a government modeled on that of the United States. Campbell had schools up and running, and a militia, too. Faced with the end of his Georgia Sea Island communities, Campbell did not abandon hope. He purchased the 1,250-acre Belleville plantation on the mainland about 15 miles southwest of St. Catherine's. At Belleville, Campbell established a new black colony. Few black people facing eviction could do as Campbell did. Many of the Dinahs, Neds, and Tituses wound up working for the restored landowner for a pittance, their hopes and dreams of being self-sufficient, of prospering even, crushed. It was also in the fall and winter of 1865 that Southern governments began instituting black codes, meant to limit the scope of freedom after slavery while jump-starting the region's agricultural economy by getting the freedmen to return to the fields. In essence, they were instruments of control. All persons of color who make contracts for service or labor shall be known as servants, and those with whom they contract shall be known as masters, declared a South Carolina law. To further keep black people economically oppressed, South Carolina allowed black people to be in business for themselves, say as an artisan or shopkeeper, on one condition. They had to procure licenses from district court judges. These licenses, valid for only 1 year, forced artisans to pay $10, shopkeepers $100. At the time, a man in Nashville, Tennessee, for example, could buy a pair of boots for about $4. Black codes, which began in Mississippi, compelled black people to sign yearly labor contracts with white people, called for them to work from sunup to sundown, and declared those without yearly contracts vagrants who could be forced to work. There were pass systems and curfews, too. To keep black people from being able to defend themselves, other black codes banned them from owning many types of weapons. In Mississippi, unless a black person was in the armed forces or had a license from the police board, it was a crime for him or her to keep or carry firearms of any kind, or any ammunition, dirk, or bowie knife. People convicted of violating this law would be fined up to $10. Mississippi also made black-white marriages a felony, punishable by life in the penitentiary. In Florida, black offenders could be whipped. They could also be pilloried, that is, have their heads and hands locked into the holes of a wooden framework erected on a post and left on public display to be ridiculed and even physically attacked. Black children were not spared. Orphans could be placed into apprenticeships. Poor children who were not orphans could also be placed into apprenticeships whether or not their parents wanted them bound out. Often, the new masters of these children had once owned them. Once again, black families were torn asunder. Once again, black labor was stolen. When the war closed, our master told all the people if they would stay and get in the crop, he would give them part of it. Father made us all stay. I never worked harder in my life, for I thought the more we made, the more we would get. We worked from April to 1 month to Christmas. We raised a large crop of corn and wheat and tobacco, shucked all the corn and put it in the barn, stripped all the tobacco, and finished 1 month before Christmas. Then we went to our master for our part he had promised us, but he said he wasn't going to give us anything, and he stopped giving us anything to eat, and said we couldn't live any longer on his land. Lorenzo Ivy, about 16 when the war ended, had been enslaved in Virginia. Violence was another tool white people employed to keep blacks in their place. Black men and women, even children, were beaten up, shot, stabbed, bludgeoned, whipped, strung up for not working fast enough or for failing to be sufficiently deferential to a white person. About the 4th of August, 1865, one Bill Murray beat the wife and daughters of Anthony, colored, very severely with a stick because they were singing a Union song. This is from Freedmen's Bureau agent John Siege's report on white-on-black violence in Rutherford County, Tennessee. An agent in Texas reported that on November 21, 1865, in Huntsville, a white man named Joseph Rhodes brutally attacked an elderly black man named Caleb. Rhodes kicked the old man into the fireplace, jumped on him, and tried to mash him into the fire, injuring him most severely. Wanton cruelty and whiskey. Black people weren't even safe in the Capitol. In the summer of 1865, a group of whites hurled a black woman from a moving trolley car. They had been egged on by its conductor. Freedmen's Bureau files bulged with case after case after case of attacks on and murders of black Americans. As 1865 wound down, there was something to celebrate, however. On December 6th, Georgia became the 27th of the 36 states to accept the 13th Amendment. Ratified, it could now be adopted to the Constitution. Slavery was now legally abolished in the United States. Florida had yet to ratify the amendment abolishing slavery. Mississippi had flat out rejected it and would not ratify it until 1995, then not make it official until 2013. And there was Texas. It had not yet held its state constitutional convention. Still, President Andrew Johnson declared the Union restored. 2 days earlier, when Congress reconvened, it refused to seat the newly elected representatives and senators from the former Confederate states. The clerk of the House simply left their names off the roll call. This was Congress's first salvo in its war on presidential reconstruction. It was also on Wednesday, December 4, 1865, that Congressman Thaddeus Stevens of Pennsylvania proposed forming a committee of 6 senators and 9 representatives to look into conditions in the ex-Confederate states and determine which, if any, merited readmission into the Union. The revolutionary schemes of the majority in Congress are now fully developed. The Daily Milwaukee News told its readers on December 5, 1865. This article, titled Negro Government or Disunion, is a stark reminder that it wasn't only in the South that some white people suffered from an irrational fear of black rule and vehemently opposed justice for all. The intention of the radicals, the Wisconsin newspaper went on to say, is to suppress all serious opposition to their measures by excluding the Southern representatives, and then to pass an enabling act prescribing conditions for the reconstruction of the states recently in rebellion. The Joint Committee on Reconstruction that Thaddeus Stevens had proposed was a go on December 13th. Its chair was Senator William Fessenden of Maine. Among the other senators were Ira Harris, New York, and Reverdy Johnson, Maryland, one of the committee's 3 Democrats. Thaddeus Stevens, Elihu Washburn, Illinois, and George Boutwell, Massachusetts, were among the committee's House members. These men, also known as the Joint Committee of 15, would hear testimony from 144 people, black and white, including former Confederate General Robert E. Lee, about the political, economic, and social situation, especially concerning black people, in states that had risen up in rebellion. Is there no way to arrest the insane course of Andrew Johnson? That was Thaddeus Stevens in a letter to Senator Charles Sumner in the summer of 1865. On December 18, 1865, on the floor of the House, Stevens once again decried President Johnson's policies and justified the action Congress had taken. Dead men cannot raise themselves. Dead states cannot restore their own existence as it was, he said. Congress, and Congress alone, Stevens insisted, had the power to revive them. Stevens also argued that Congress was morally obligated to protect freed people. If we leave them to the legislation of their late masters, we had better have left them in bondage. Information wanted. During and after the Civil War, countless freed people placed ads in black-owned and white-owned newspapers, searching for family, a husband, a wife, children, siblings, lost to them through sale, self-liberation, or in the fog of war. $200 reward. The subscriber will pay the above reward to anyone who will bring to him or to this office his grandchild of about 5 years of age. His father's name was Jacob Mackenzie, and his mother's name was Selina. The mother was formerly held by Jacob Barrett of Linton, Georgia, and hired to Dr. Carr of Washington County, Georgia. Soon after General Sherman's army entered Savannah, the mother and child started for the same place. At Winnsboro, the mother was taken sick and placed the child in charge of a gentleman who had but one leg and who promised to take the child to Savannah for her. The gentleman's name is unknown, but if the facts stated shall be sufficient to identify the child, the kindness of the one who restores him will ever be remembered in addition to the above reward being paid. Isaac Williams, 50 Wolf Street, Charleston, South Carolina. South Carolina Leader, December 9, 1865. Peter and Peggy Vinson, colored, of Halifax County, wish to obtain information of their child, named Emma, commonly called Paz. She formerly belonged to Mr. Charles Henderson of Mississippi and was bought and left by him in Lincolnton, North Carolina. She is dark-complected and about 14 years of age. Any information will be gladly received by her parents at Brinkleyville, Halifax County, North Carolina, or by Caroline Hayes, Exchange Hotel, Raleigh. Tri-Weekly Standard, Raleigh, North Carolina, May 31, 1866. Lincolnton, where the Vinson's daughter was last seen, was more than 200 miles away from their home in Brinkleyville. Information wanted of Mary Buckner, who formerly belonged to Mary Morrison in Culpeper County, Virginia. Also of Daniel, Reuben, and George Buckner, formerly belonging to John Miller. Any information will be very thankfully received by Robert Buckner, Post Office Box 317, Logansport, Indiana. Christian Recorder, February 2, 1867. In a subsequent ad, Robert Buckner said that he had found one relative, Reuben Buckner. People placed information wanted ads into the 20th century. Mrs. Molly Curran of Covington, Virginia, placed one in 1907, more than 40 years after the war ended. Curran was in search of an uncle, Lewis Smith, last known to be in Arkansas, and her aunts, Sally Ann Thorpe, who had married a Spaniard, and Patsy Thorpe. Of her Aunt Patsy, Curran stated, "She was sold during slavery, and when last heard of, was living in Louisiana."